All righty. Hello, everybody. Hey, friends. It is Vincent here from Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Podcast.
And this is Patrick from Gaze Do the D podcast. And we are here for another crossover episode of Magic and Monsters, where we explore the wonderful world of creature features.
And not just any creature features, those dark films that came out of the House of Mouse, the ones that make you say, wait, 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 wait. That is a Disney movie, and not only a Disney movie, maybe even a superhero movie. Today we're talking about Morbius. It is Morbin time, everybody. Tweedles and Kaiju campers.
Here we go.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
Perfect. Nailed it. It's our second installment here of Magic and Monsters. Roger Rabbit was so much fun to talk about. Patrick, feel free to disagree with me, but I had a lot of fun.
I can't disagree with you. I love that movie so much, and our listeners can know that because it was like a 4-hour episode because we couldn't stop talking about Roger Rabbit. And that's okay.
It is okay. Today, this week's episode will be shorter, not because, we could talk for hours and hours about anything, Patrick.
True.
But is Morbius does it have the same depth and richness as Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Debatable.
Is that
depending on?
Sorry, I'm cutting to the end already. It's not as rich or as deep as.
I'm trying to be very nice. This is going to be a theme for me. I'm going to be very nice to this film.
Great.
Very, very generous. Because I think it's easy to rip apart. But
Sure,
as we
fair.
say on Camp Kaiju, we review the good, the bad, and the campy. And all strange beasts are welcome. So
That's right.
Morbius, if his parents signed him up for camp this summer, we're not going to turn him away just for being a bad movie. We're going to say,
That's
come
fair.
on in, welcome. There's a game of Monopoly happening over there, and the other vampires are over there.
That's right. Morbius might be sitting by himself at a table at this camp, but he is welcome nonetheless. You're right.
So, what's up with you in Disneyland? I meant that. That's actually no pun intended. I meant Disney Space Land for you in your life. How's the podcast going?
Thanks so much for asking. Let's see. When last we met, what has been going on? I've been to Disneyland Paris this past summer, which was a blast. Highly recommend. The overseas parks are just awesome. They're not to be missed, not to be slept on. Let's see. What else? I have to toot your own horn for you, Vincent. I just did a reading of your show, Wolf's Blood, at Lakeshore Players Theater. Had a blast. Love the script. Hopefully there's more to come out of the show.
Yeah. Well, thanks for tooting my horn.
You're welcome.
I'll toot yours.
Oh,
I
thanks.
listened to your Holes episode of Gaze Do the D. Not a
Yeah.
monster movie, but a really fun movie. I think that has a lot under the surface too. So for Camp Kaiju listeners, Patrick and his co-hosts do review movies occasionally. And those are always really insightful, good conversations that I would recommend.
Thanks. Thank you, sir. What's going on with you over at Camp Kaiju? What's exciting? What's going on? What's coming up? What should we not
Ooh.
miss?
Well, speaking of wolves,
Mm.
last week's episode was on Universal's The Wolfman from 1941.
Yes.
Matt and I dig into that. And this coming month, we have a really strange movie called God Told Me To, which is like a religious cult film from the 70s. Supernatural stuff going on. And then Godzilla -1. So we're going to have a lot of fun talking about the big G. not too long. Yeah.
Amazing. Man, The Wolfman, such a great movie. Are you excited for the remake that's coming out?
I am intrigued, I would say.
Fair.
I'm here for it. I'm gonna watch it.
Yeah.
I don't expect it to be necessarily a good movie. It's from the same director as The Invisible Man from
Right.
a few
Yeah.
years back. So
Yeah.
that movie I do think deserves its critical acclaim.
hmm
So I'm like, okay, maybe hopefully The Wolfman is at that level.
It appears to like the previews that I've seen, it looks like it's going to be sort of that kind of same genre of taking, classic horror story and turning it into more of a psychological thriller instead. So I'm interested to see where they go with this one for The Wolfman.
Same. And that comes out in January.
hmm
Shifting gears, getting back to vampires a little bit. How
Yes.
about the new Nosferatu?
Oh, that's right. I forgot that. Yeah. For sure. Nosferatu, classic, another classic movie. Really creepy. Already one of the creepiest movies in the world. So I'm interested to see what they do with this one as well.
Yeah, that's from Robert Eggers, did The Witch, The Lighthouse, and it comes out Christmas Day.
Amazing. So a really feel good holiday movie is Nosferatu. And then wait, for New Year's Eve, you can go watch The Wolfman. What's happening right now?
Maybe we'll be able to get to the movie theaters for that one.
Yeah, I think we have to.
After our Christmas mornings, we'll
That's right.
yeah.
Incredible.
Before we continue, I do just got to shout out Camp Kaiju's patrons, Jason, Chris, Sean, Peggy, and our anonymous patron. Thank you for your support. It allows Camp Kaiju to branch off a little bit and do some fun collabs with Patrick and Gaze Do the D.
Yeah, thanks for joining that family. And then I guess on the same side, thank you to all of our Patreons as well. If you want to join the Gaze to the D Patreon page, go over to gazetothed.com and click the donate button. And I imagine they can also go to campkaiju.com and click your Patreon button as well.
That's true. You can also just find the links to that in our show notes wherever you podcast.
True.
And
story.
I will add, it's hard for me to ask people for likes and reviews and ratings on the podcatchers, but as the producer, I have to do my duty. So for any of you all listening, if you do like this episode, go ahead and give us a positive rating and review.
Please.
It would go a long way, and we really appreciate it.
It does. It's true. It does. It goes further than you think it does. Like it actually does help a lot when you do that. So thank you in advance.
Yeah. Let's see. So everybody listening, here's what we're going to do. We are going to run through why we chose Morbius, our own histories with this film, and maybe we'll get into the larger MCU and what Sony's doing. We're also going to talk about the supernatural legacy of Marvel and the comics. We'll get into the comic history of Morbius. And then we will talk about this movie specifically, its production, its release, and its reception. We have a quiz show lined up. And this is my redemption tour here because I went too easy on Patrick with the Roger Rabbit quiz. And I lost.
I may have gone a little too difficult on that one as well. So,
well,
yeah, the tables are likely going to turn today.
I hope so. If not, I got to regroup here. And then we'll talk about our personal reviews of this film, how we felt watching it, if we're still thinking about it, those sorts of things.
I like it. It. Should we get into it?
Let's do it. So why Morbius? It's a big question. What are your thoughts, Patrick?
Well, to be quite honest, a little behind the curtain here, we didn't actually choose Morbius in the first place. movies for this episode.
Morbius chose us.
Morbius did seek us out after two failed attempts at trying to watch other movies that no longer exist anywhere in the world. So unless we want to like buy them on eBay and watch them on VHS or something, we'd have
For
to buy
$80.
for $80. It's ridiculous. So we were going to try to watch Watcher in the Woods, right? And then we realized very quickly that that doesn't exist anymore. The TV show still exists, but it's not the same as the movie. So we skipped that one. And then we were going to try to watch Something Wicked This Way Comes, but that's also not available anywhere, which is a shame because they're both wonderful, wonderful movies that deserve to be seen again.
I only know that through reputation.
Yeah.
So
fair.
Watcher in the Woods, I wanted to watch. It's from 1979, stars Betty Davis, I
That's
believe.
right. Yeah.
And it's a ghost story. It's a teen ghost story. And it has been called the scariest Disney movie of all time.
It's creepy. That's for sure.
But for whatever reason, I guess Disney hasn't got the memo that horror is the most popular genre. Disney's buried this movie.
They did. They absolutely did.
DVDs are out of print, so you
Yeah.
can find them on Amazon again for way too much money. It's not streaming anywhere. It's a real bummer.
Yeah, I would love to dig into why this is, but it's just gone. Like there's no real discussion out there around why they chose to get rid of it. So I'm curious if anyone else knows if there's a story behind it. I would love to know. So anyways, all that being said, we then pivoted because we did want to do a Halloween episode and bring out kind of a creepier movie in the Disney realm. And so we went with a vampire, and that would be Morbius. So we kind of landed on this by default. We wanted to watch it anyways, but it wasn't our first choice. But it was a good choice because I have a lot of opinions about this movie, so I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Same. And I got to shout out Camp Kaiju's friend and our mutual friend, Adri, at a summer barbecue not too long ago. She very adamantly requested Camp Kaiju do Morbius.
Interesting.
And I was really like, I'm not going to rule it out, but here's the deal I'm going to share with you, Patrick, and everyone else.
Yeah.
Like Camp Kaiju, we stay away from Marvel movies, superhero movies, the same as we do like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. Like, are there monsters in these worlds? Yes. But they're not exactly strange to these worlds, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I don't know. That's not like a monster movie when you think of a monster movie.
Totally. I get that. Marvel is its own like realm. I feel like it's not necessarily a horror genre, though you could classify Morbius as a horror movie within the Marvel cinematic universe and the Marvel comic universe as well. So this one does stand out. I think you and I were talking about this already off camera. It does stand out just a little bit from the main Marvel world, and I feel like that's a little bit because it's also a Sony movie as well. So it's not necessarily just a Disney movie. Sony actually really produced this movie, and they lean a little heavier into that genre than Disney does. So it makes sense.
Yeah, and what Morbius feels different to me, and this is why I'm like, yeah, I can make an exception in my almighty power, that Morbius lives more in the world of Blade, the Vampire Hunter, which, have you seen those movies from the Wesley Snipes films?
Absolutely. Love them. Big fan.
Yeah. Those movies were among the earliest Marvel movies, and like they predate the X-Men franchise. And the first Blade movie was hugely popular. And I remember watching that. I had no idea Blade was even a superhero.
Right.
Those movies aren't made like with that aesthetic we're used to today. So we would absolutely talk about Blade on Camp Kaiju. We haven't yet, but 100%. So by that extension, Morbius does inhabit that world. I was like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
We may not do Venom on Camp Kaiju, but we would do Morbius.
That's fair. And speaking of world, like, yeah, just nerding out just a scotch, is is that the Blade movies, they were, as you said, created a while ago, before Disney had acquired Marvel and before Marvel had created the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so they live outside of what you consider currently the Marvel Cinematic Universe, although you could argue that's different now because of Deadpool and Wolverine, because he does make an appearance there, which is, we'll get into that maybe a little bit later. But so this whole world of Venom and Morbius, and you could argue even Spider-Man a little bit, live in a different universe. So I can see that this would actually fit quite nicely into Camp Kaiju and Gaze to the D.
Right. So can you talk a little bit more about your history of this film and Marvel as a whole from a Disney point of view?
Sure. Yeah. I think the reason that we don't talk about this movie necessarily on the Gaze to the D podcast is because, yes, it is a Disney movie, but only in that because Disney owns Marvel. Like, Disney didn't really hype this movie up on their platforms necessarily. It does live on Disney Plus, but that's only because, they still want the dollars, I guess, from it, because it is actually a pretty popular movie, albeit not widely, I don't know, critically acclaimed. It's not a critically acclaimed movie. I myself personally am a huge fan of the Marvel world. The whole Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I even like this side of the Marvel world too, this little bit of a darker side. I'm a huge fan, actually, of the Venom movies. I really, really enjoyed those movies. I think that they sort of hit the nail on the head with those movies from a Sony perspective, because they also got that a little bit of the Disney voice in there too, that just sort of clever silliness that Venom is. And then the Spider-Man sort of Homecoming universe, I'm a huge fan of. I think those movies are just pitch perfect. They're absolutely incredible. But they lean a lot more heavily into the Disney side of Marvel as well. And so that's part of why that is too. Legal reasons, Sony owns it. Disney doesn't own it. But they do have a stake in it. Anyways. And then there's the Morbius world as well. And it's just, I don't know. It's not my favorite movie, but I'm interested to talk about it. But I love this world, but I feel like they missed the mark on this one in inviting Morbius into this side of the Marvel world, if that makes sense. Like, they didn't go very far. They almost tried to make it its own movie. And so it feels very far away from the Disney universe. And that's why I think a lot of people forget that it even exists in the Disney world. Does that make sense? It's kind of a long roundabout way of saying, I don't know if it fits necessarily in the Disney world, in the Disney canon.
Right. Well, technically it may exist. This character in this movie exists in the MCU.
Yeah.
You almost feel like it doesn't.
Yeah. I don't. Yeah. It's like a distant cousin, I feel like, that didn't quite get on the invite list to the wedding or something. You know what I mean? Like, they're just not quite there.
Now, admittedly, I have not seen the Venom movies. I have not seen Madam Web. These other Sony projects. I'm not interested in Kraven the Hunter. Here's the deal. You and I talk about this a lot, but for listeners, like, I grew up a Marvel nut. Like, I am currently looking at several reference books on Marvel characters on my desk. I have so many comic books. And up until Infinity War, I watched all those movies right when they came out. I love the interconnectedness. I love this idea of emulating what the comics do so well, that you can have Black Panther show up in a Thor movie, which may or may not have happened, but in the comics that happened all the time.
Yeah.
But then since that film, I just kind of fell off. For me, I couldn't keep up with all the output that Disney was creating with the TV shows, and like, everything was so connected.
Yeah.
That I was a little intimidated by the mass. It was critical mass. I was like, I can't do this anymore.
It's a lot. Yeah. It's a lot.
So I love comic books. I love Spider-Man more than anything. That doesn't necessarily shed over into the movies. So back to my original point.
Yeah.
Sony makes these Venom movies, Morbius. There's a Kraven the Hunter movie coming out. The Andrew Garfield Sony pictures, I didn't enjoy those as much
Fair.
as the Sam Raimi ones. So, especially with Sony, there's a vibe, there's an aesthetic there that I've never really been a fan of.
I totally get that. I totally get they knock it out of the park a lot with specifically with the Spider-Man movies. I think with the Venom movies, they get on base with it at least. They don't necessarily hit it out of the park. But then for me, anyways, specifically Madam Web and a little bit Morbius, it's like they didn't even show up to the ballpark. They just sort of did their own thing. Like I don't know. I'm beating this metaphor to death, but
Doing great.
thanks. So yeah, I totally get it. It's sort of like DC for me. I love the DC comics, but the DC movies, there's been maybe one or two that I've been a fan of. The rest of them, it's just an aesthetic thing that I just cannot latch onto. There's something they just don't quite get like a human interest involved enough or something. I don't know there's a disconnect for me with them. And that's, I think, what I have sometimes with Sony as well. There's just a little bit of a disconnect.
That's a good way to put it. And towards the end of this episode, how that disconnect happens with Morbius, I would love to hear more specifics because
Sure.
I can point to things too with the script and
Yeah.
the direction. Yeah. Well, so okay. So we're talking about we talked about Blade a little bit. We talked about the darker side of Marvel Comics, and like you, I love that darker side. Marvel, and people ask, when you ask people about comic books, you instantly think about superheroes. But
Sure.
comic books have a long history in horror stories and the macabre and the supernatural. I'm getting off a little bit of tangent here, but in the 1950s, there was a huge pushback against the comics industry from parents and religious interests. And there's like a huge congressional hearings about censorship in comic books and whether or not these are appropriate for children. Because a lot of these comics at the time in the 50s, the most popular genre was horror. And the artwork, I think, is gorgeous, but they depict like flesh melting off of bones and cannibalism and dismemberments, which, what is child appropriate? That is just the question they were debating at the time.
Yeah.
The very conservative America that it was.
A good example of that is sort of the Tales from the Crypt comic series. If you want some imagery that you're talking about, I think anyways is where you're going with some of that is like, just look up some of those images. And that's exactly what they were bucking against, I guess, because they were quite macabre for sure for kids.
Yeah. And I think Tales of the Crypt started in the 50s.
It did. Yeah. 1950, I think.
There you go. Mars Attacks, the movie?
I do. Yeah.
Do you know that was based on a series of trading cards?
Oh, you know what? That sounds familiar, but I wouldn't have known that off the top of my head. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just doing a Tim Burton dive, and that led me down Mars Attacks to the trading cards, which were from the 1960s. And the same thing, like the Topps trading card company got in a lot of hot water over the artwork of these Martians vaporizing humans.
Sure.
Now it's just like, I don't know. I look at Mars Attacks and I'm like, that's so entertaining. It's so imaginative, and
for sure.
But at the time, controversy.
Well, for sure. I mean, if you think about, because they were terrorizing Americans, I think was part of it. Like it was specifically like terror. And then during that time, there was a lot politically going on, and so they were like, we can't have kids celebrating American terror, which I get it, but yeah, I don't know. It was a lot of censorship happening for sure.
I think American Terror is like the great name like for a band or a haunted house.
There you go. We're gonna start it now.
So in 1971, Morbius makes his debut as a character in Marvel Comics, specifically Amazing Spider-Man. And he is dubbed Morbius the Living Vampire because he's not a true vampire, the way Count Dracula is. And Dracula, mind you, is a character in Marvel Comics based on the
Oh, yeah.
the literature.
Right.
So Marvel loves a good vampire. And how Morbius gets his power, he's Dr. Michael Morbius, and this is reflected in the movie too. He's a Nobel Prize winning scientist, and he is afflicted with a blood disease where he's like losing blood cells, and he comes up with like some sort of serum or antidote that replenishes blood cells. But here's where it differs in the comics. In the comics, he also goes through like an electroshock therapy, and that combination of electroshocks and this blood serum creates an out of control sequence that turns him into a vampire in the sense that he now needs to feed on human blood to replenish the blood he is losing because his blood cells keep dying.
Right.
So that's Morbius. That's his beginnings. He's an anti-hero traditionally in the comics.
Right.
He's not a villain per se. He tries to only feed on the blood of the bad guys. But a really interesting development in his story and his relationship with Spider-Man is that as Michael Morbius, he realizes that Spider-Man has radioactive blood, and he becomes convinced that it's this radioactive blood that will cure him of his disease. So that's why he always has run-ins with Spider-Man. He's always trying to drink Spider-Man's blood.
I love that. That tracks. That totally tracks. Absolutely. It's so interesting. Very interesting. I have to say, I do love a good anti-hero, sort of a vigilante kind of a character. I think there's so many interesting places you can go with it. So I do like this character on the surface. Like, I think that there's a depth there that can be explored. And I hope maybe is explored in a different way under different care, maybe.
Yeah. And just thinking out loud this character is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Is there enough character though for him to lead his own movie, his own franchise? Or, and it's no diss to the character, is he better suited as a supporting character in a Spider-Man or a Blade movie?
Mm-hmm. And I think, I think that's where I would have put him. And there's a lot of characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that they have been trying to like create vehicles for that. It's just like, this is a supporting character. This character is much more interesting when they're part of a different story because there's not enough to go around. There's just not enough to really, excuse the pun, flesh out here in a full length feature film. It doesn't quite work for me. Maybe it could have, I don't know, under better writing and better care, but not here, not now. I would have loved to have seen him, team up with Blade or something, or even team up with Spider-Man in something. I think that would be really cool, even if they have their differences. That's always an interesting, like, sort of a buddy comedy kind of a thing where two opposite characters are fighting against the same villain.
Yeah, imagine. I mean, first of all, I think it's wildly awesome that Spider-Man has a vampire character that he battles with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, but see, here's the difference in tone. So we have a vampire character, and this is a problem I had with Morbius, the movie, is that it's rated PG-13, and you really don't get any sense of violence. Like, there's no blood in this movie.
Sure.
Like, it's all very mild. And in a vampire movie, come on, you got to show us the blood.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we want to see a vampire movie.
Right.
Does that tone fit within the Marvel Sony Spider-Man tone that they have curated so carefully?
Right. And yeah, I think that's a really good point. There is something inherently sort of grotesque about vampire stories, and they don't do that here because of, you're right, the tone, the sort of the world that they're creating. is a violent world, but it's not a bloody world necessarily the way that Blade was. I mean, there was actually a blood ball in Blade, right? Like an entire scene was covered in blood in that movie, which is incredible to see. But here, yeah, it's a different world, and they have to tame it down a little bit. And so maybe that is probably part of it too, that they can't go where you want them to go with a movie like this, just because of the world that they sort of box themselves into, which is not a bad thing, but maybe he just doesn't need to live there then,
Right. Boxing themselves in, I think is a great way to put it.
Yeah.
There is talk of a new movie.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know more about that?
Not enough. They've been toying with it for a while and teasing it for a while. And then, like I said, Blade does show up in the Deadpool and Wolverine movie, which is incredible. So I don't know enough about it. I can't remember the name of the actor who's going to play it. So it is in the works. It is happening. I think it comes out next year or maybe in 2 years. But as far as the storyline, I don't know anything about that. So, more to come.
Same. Mahershala Ali.
Yes.
Has been at least preliminary cast as Blade. I think he'd be an excellent choice.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder and I hope that with Deadpool and Wolverine being rated R, that Disney is willing to go there with a new Blade. Yeah. And hey, maybe a new Morbius.
Yeah, I agree. I think they have to at this point with Blade. Like, no one's going to want to see it, and they're going to be expecting, Blade. Blade is a badass character, and things get weird with Blade, and so I think they have to do it. Otherwise, what's the point in bringing and rebooting it?
Right, a blessing and a curse that those Wesley Snipes. At least the first one I know is critically popular. The second one's directed by Guillermo del Toro.
Mm-hmm.
So it still is like a really well-made movie.
Yeah,
but I don't know if it's popularly regarded. And the third one I know isn't really talked about. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Either way, for better or for worse, there's a standard that I hope Disney reaches with a new Blade movie.
Yeah, I have a feeling they will because of what they've done with Deadpool. I think that they're happy to lean into that as long as they market it correctly.
Yeah. Well, speaking of marketing films,
yeah.
Why don't we get into the production history of Morbius a little bit? Because it was not a straightforward pre-production for this film.
No, it sure was not. And it was on hold for a very long time as well.
Yes.
Do you want me to get into it, or do you want to?
Yeah, you can get into it.
Sure. I mean, so from my recollection and from what I've read, so it was released in 2022, right under Columbia Pictures in association with Marvel Entertainment and Sony. Like we already said, just like the Venom movies and the Spider-Man movies, it was intended to really be a part of that world. And in fact, I think way back when it was being conceived in 2018 or 2019, when the rights were purchased, I think Sony originally purchased the rights intending Morbius to be a part of the Blade world, and then he wasn't. And then they intended to give him his own movie, and that never happened. And then we fast forwarded a while to 2019 when Jared Leto signed on to do the movie, and then things were back on track with a solo movie. And again, a lot of the writing and a lot of the production, from what I understand, they were really going to put this in the Spider-Man sort of universe, in this world. And then I don't know why, but for some reason in editing or something, they got cold feet on it or something, because they pulled out almost every reference to Blade and to Spider-Man into that whole world. They just pulled all of it, which I think left some plot holes in the movie. If you really watch it, you're like, wait, it feels like something else was supposed to be here, but it's not. So I don't know what happened. So anyways, Back to the production though. So in 2019, things are underway. It was supposed to be released in 2020, but of course the COVID-19 pandemic happened, and no one really wanted to see a movie or were ready to see a movie about a guy who uses bats. I think it was bad marketing on on just really bad timing for for bats in general in 2020 and 2021. And then it got pushed. It was supposed to then be released in 2021 and got pushed again, and then was finally released in March 2022 to not great reviews. In fact, it had a huge, this is pretty funny, a huge sort of like underground campaign on like YouTube and stuff, people making fun of this movie and memes and all that stuff. And so it's so much so that Sony re-released it a year later, I think, or like 6 months later, and it did just as poorly. Like they thought that it was going to get people to come see the movie, like, come see how bad this is. And people were like, no, we already know that it's bad. We're not going to watch it again. And so, yeah, it did not do well. I think, in fact, it worldwide, even to date, it hasn't even hit the 200 million mark for proceeds. So not doing great. Not doing great.
Yeah, I know in my own research, like it is one of the worst reviewed, received superhero movies out there. Think about any of those Fantastic Four films. It kind of ranks in with the legacy of those movies. Now, here's the thing. I'm gonna say this right now.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was that bad.
Mm-hmm.
I expected a train wreck. And you know what? I got a movie that was a little boring, but it wasn't a sloppy film. Like it was, I've seen poorly made movies.
Fair. I know. You know what? In all honesty, I don't disagree with you. It's not like the worst thing that's ever happened. Obviously, it's not even the worst thing in Marvel that's ever happened. So it's a fine movie, but it doesn't. Here's the thing for me: it doesn't add anything necessarily to the Marvel world. I didn't go away from this thinking, I can't wait to see what happens next, or I hope they incorporate these characters into this world. It just was its own thing, and it just kind of petered off for me. I lost interest a lot during the movie, but there was a lot of good actors in it. There was some interesting fight sequences. There's some interesting stuff happening with the camera work and CGI work. It just, there was just a lot of plot. I think for me, definitely it was just the writing and the conceiving of the movie is where it really jumped the track for me.
Yeah. I have more to say on that, but
yeah, fair.
You mentioned the memes that came out of this. I think that's the legacy of this movie, just as a big joke. Which, here we are talking about it. So, like, Morbius is welcome to the party, even if he's sitting by himself.
Fair.
I do want to ask you before we get into our quiz show.
Yeah.
How does this compare to Madam Web? Because I've seen like some reviews of that. That movie seems like a poorly made movie. With its editing and I don't know, but I haven't seen it. You've seen them both.
I have unfortunately seen both of the movies. So interestingly, written by the same people. So Matt Sazama and Brooke Sharpless, I think is his name, wrote both of these movies. And where it differs is definitely Madam Web was absolutely a horrifically written movie. Like the script has so many plot holes. It's like dead dialogue as well, if that makes sense. Like there's just no life in this movie at all in what they're saying. They're not creative in terms of phrases. They're not, it's almost as though they just took pages from the comic book and threw them on a page and said, that'll work. That'll do it.
Wow.
There just wasn't much thought put into it. And you can see that a little bit here with Morbius. Morbius, however, for whatever reason, is a better written movie. That being said, it's not a wonderfully written movie. There's lines in there like this is the one that bothered me the entire time. They kept trying to sell this phrase of like we're the original Spartans, the few against the many, and I'm like, no, I think the Spartans were the original Spartans. Like that's just a bad line. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean the original? The what?
Right. There were so many lines like that, and I can't remember all of them. But yeah, I was like that. It's like it's almost an indescribable thing when
Mhm.
we're so familiar with story structure and dialogue and
Sure.
writing plays, and it's just like when you hear an awkward line,
Hmm.
you just know that it was written poorly, and you can't quite put your finger on it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Because
yeah, there.
both movies have great actors in them. I mean, some not so much, but generally have really, people who have been in better things and done really well in them are saying, and you can tell, you can just see it in their faces of like, I hate saying this line. I don't want to say it. It's a terrible line. And that was just it the entire time. Specifically for Madam Web, it was just
Hmm.
bad line after bad line after bad line with no real plot point that made any sense. Morbius at least had a little bit of a through line that they were getting from point A to point B. It just didn't always make sense.
Wow.
You had to do a lot of the work yourself as an audience member.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Won't be high on my list to watch.
It's worth it just to like having seen it, like just to complete your Marvel history lesson, I guess, but it's
Oh boy.
definitely not one that they're going to return to at all, ever.
All right. Well, good.
Yeah.
Let us go into our quiz here.
Woohoo, I like it.
Here we go. Patrick, how many questions do you have for me?
I have 3 questions for you, Vincent.
I have 3 questions for you. These are multiple choice, so
Incredible.
you do not. It's not like our typical trivia that we have on Camp Kaiju.
Yes.
This is just a quiz show. And Patrick, while you prepare your questions, I'm
Sure.
going to get our tallies from the last quiz show we did. I'm going to see where
Are
we
you sure you
stand.
want to look at it, Vincent? Are you sure you want
It can't be worse than Morbius. So,
to? Heyo.
Patrick, you have 3 points, and I have 1.5.
That's right. Because I think I worded one of my questions oddly, and that threw you off.
Yeah. So you get 1 point for each question. You can say no. Do we want to subtract points for any wrong answer?
Oh, wow. I'm not feeling very confident on this quiz, so I'm going to say no to subtraction this time around.
Okay, because you're in a position to say that.
Yeah,
Great.
fair.
All right, hit me with your first question.
Okay. So all of my questions are related to vampires in Disney history, Vincent.
Nice.
Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. In The Nightmare Before Christmas, what toy do the 4 vampire brothers create? Is it the shrunken head? Is it the zombie duck? Or is it the jack-o'-lantern in a box?
Zombie duck.
That is correct. Ding,
Yes!
ding, ding. Good job. Good job.
Woo!
I like
All
it. I
right.
like it.
I love that part of the movie.
It's so great. That's such a great movie.
Yeah. Okay, I have 1 point.
Ding, ding, ding.
My questions largely relate to Morbius,
Ooh, okay.
but Marvel in general.
Great.
Okay. I'm going to give you the easy one.
Uh-oh.
Though it may not be clear in Morbius, from which country does the character originate in? Is it Romania, Greece, or Bulgaria?
Oh, goodness. Okay. So you're asking, where does Dr. Morbius hail from? Is that the question?
Yes, his
Okay.
country of origin.
Okay. I want to, for some reason, Bulgaria is in my head, so I'm just going to go with that one.
You are incorrect.
Ah,
It is Greece.
Greece. Interesting. Yeah, that was not clear. A lot of things weren't clear in this movie, and that was one of them.
But I almost gave it up earlier because you're talking about the Spartan lines 300.
Oh.
Knowing that they're in Greece in the beginning. But like you don't know they're in Greece?
I wouldn't, because he has an American accent and his friend Milo has a British accent. And so why would they be in Greece? It doesn't make any sense. It starts out not making sense. Great.
Absolutely. Jared Leto is so American and Matt Smith is so British.
So weird. Okay.
All right. Well, it's not your fault. It's the writing. So I'm ready for my second question.
Okay. Here we go. On Friday the 13th, 2000, Vincent, this Disney Channel original movie was released, featuring Caroline Rhea playing a woman who's been set up on a date with a mysterious man who turns out to be a vampire. Is the title of this movie My Date with Dracula? Is it Mom's Got a Date with a Vampire? Or is it Love at Stake?
Oh, I tell you, I wish it was Love at Stake. But is it My Mom's Got a Date with a Vampire?
It is Mom's Got a Date with a Vampire.
All right.
I tried so hard to come up with a worse title, but there's nothing worse than that title, I think.
I mean, it tells you what it is.
It's the whole plot of the movie. It's right there in the title. You don't have to watch it.
Maybe next time on Magic and Monsters.
That's right. Amazing. All right. Let's go with my next incorrect answer.
Well, I don't know. So the actor Tyrese Gibson, well, he's a musician, but he's playing the agent Simon Stroud in Morbius. Now, in the trailer, this character was featured with a robotic appendage that never appeared in the final film.
What? Appendage?
True fact.
Okay.
What was this appendage? A leg, an arm, or a neck?
What? A robotic appendage? Oh man, neck is so obvious, but because of oh man. No, I really want it to be the neck, but I think he probably had. We have too many robotic arms in Marvel, so I feel like it's probably a robotic leg.
No, it's the arm.
It is the arm. They can't get away from robotic arms in Marvel, man. They're everywhere. Everyone's got a robotic arm in some movie. I wonder how many movies are out there with a character with a robotic arm. I bet there's a lot.
Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
Iron Man.
That's so
more
funny.
than one.
Yeah. Does the Punisher have a robotic arm, or
No.
I can't remember.
I don't think so.
I thought he had some. Anyways, but yeah, amazing. All right.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. We're on to question number 3. I'm batting 0 right now. Okay. Here we go. So Disney has a full animated show featuring a young girl vampire, which aired for 3 seasons. What was the name of that show? Was it The Littlest Vampire? Was it Vampirina? Or was it Draculina?
No idea. Not a clue. I'm going to say, what was the first one?
The Littlest Vampire.
That's just the cutest name. So I'm going to go with The Littlest Vampire.
It is a cute name. It is not The Littlest Vampire, though. It is Vampirina. And it's actually a really good show. I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. For all ages. There's musical numbers in it. It's great. It's wonderful.
All right.
Yeah.
When was this on?
I think it was on, I think it stopped airing like 2 years ago. So it's like 5-ish years old.
Vampirina.
Vampirina.
All right, my last question.
Yes.
Once upon a time, Count Dracula, desperate for blood, attacked this farm animal that later became a vampire. This creature became a foe of Howard the Duck.
Oh.
And later an ally of Deadpool. What is this vampire's name?
Oh, wow.
Is it Hell Cow? Hell Horse? Or Hell Swine?
Oh, that's so good. Hell swine. I oh see, I know that you're very clever, and so I think you're trying to throw me with hell swine, but it does sound very Howard the Ducky, so I'm going with hell swine.
I wish.
Ah,
It is Hell Cow.
hell cow. They missed the mark on that one. It should have been hell swine because it
Yeah.
sounds like Helsing, like Van Helsing. So they could have named it Van Helswine. That would have been incredible. Incredible. Well done. Well done. You got me. You got me on this one.
Formerly, the Hell Cow, formerly known as Bessie,
Bessie
was attacked by Count Dracula.
Okay.
And became Hell Cow.
That tracks. That tracks. Howard the Duck. That's a movie we should maybe consider doing as well. Forget
Maybe.
about that one.
I have yet to see it, but again, I know it's one of the worst movies ever made.
It's
Allegedly.
wild. It's wild. It's yeah. It's burned into my memory. That's for sure. Mhm, mhm. A cool character though, Howard the Duck. Underrated.
Yeah, totally. I have a Howard the Duck little action figure of all.
Aw, adorable.
Yeah.
That's funny. Too good. Too good.
Okay. Well, let's just dig into a little bit of what we liked, what we didn't like about Morbius. So let me ask you, like, what works for you in this film?
Such a great question. Not a lot to choose. No, I'm just kidding. So I did actually really enjoy the character, although I have things to say about it. Milo. I think the nemesis, in the character who was also in the movie, who was also his friend, turned out to be his enemy later on. I think that's an interesting plot line. I don't know enough about the comic books to know if they invented that for this movie or not, but maybe you can answer that. But I found that character really interesting and intriguing, and maybe that had a lot to do with who was it? Chris Smith who played it,
Matt Smith.
Matt Smith, sorry, Matt Smith who played it, who's great, who was wonderful in the movie. Given some not great lines, but the character itself I thought was good. And I also, like I said before, I like an anti-hero. I like a conflicted character who is trying so hard to be good, but can't help it, but be bad sometimes in that he needs to drink human blood. And I think there's a lot there that could have been a better movie. And I think I appreciated maybe the characters more than I appreciated the movie itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, in the beginning I loved I think I might have liked everything up until Michael becomes Morbius the vampire. I feel like the tone was campy in like a good way, like a so bad it's good.
Sure.
There was like
Okay.
mad scientist feels going on. The hubris, the science. I'm gonna create this blood serum, and it was like very like that's what you read comic books for, anyways. You're just like, yeah, this feels good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stick with the good. I liked so there's a little Easter egg for horror fans. The ship that Michael Morbius is experimenting on, that's parked out in international waters, it's called the Murnau or the Murnau. F.W. Murnau was the director of the original Nosferatu.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So for vampire fans, you're like, I see you.
I like it.
Yeah. That's it.
Is that it? That's it. That's what it ends with. You like it.
No,
That's funny.
like I agree with you. Like there's a lot of interesting ideas being presented.
Yeah.
In fact, including I picked up on this. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The conflict between Milo and Michael seems to be Milo's resentment that because they both have this illness, this like degenerative illness. Milo's resentment that Michael, as Milo says, doesn't accept who he is. That's repeated often in this film. And when I see two male characters, especially vampires, having that kind of conflict, I wonder if there's not a subtext of Milo is interested in being more than friends with Michael. And Michael's just, for whatever reason, not engaged in that way.
Hmm. Yeah,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
definitely some sort of a underlying tension between the two of them that doesn't really get revealed. Yeah, I think that's interesting.
But the movie doesn't explore that. It doesn't like
No.
invest in its stakes, no pun intended. It's just a very flat movie.
Yeah.
It has ideas that it doesn't like who gave these writers a job?
Twice. Gave him another job from Adam Webb.
Yeah. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting. I'm going off a little
Yeah.
bit. Like in the playwriting world, in the theater world, you
Yeah.
write a script, it's never just produced. It goes through development and you work
Hmm.
with people who give you critiques and feedback and they'll see an interesting idea and they'll challenge you to go deeper into that idea, flesh it out.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I feel like with movies, you just write a script and the producer goes, "All right, this is it. We're going to film this movie." And like I don't think there's that kind of development phase. I don't
Yeah.
think. I don't know, but I don't think so.
Yeah. There was a lot of easy stuff that they missed in this movie, I feel like, with plot. Like they just could have added a couple more lines that would have explained something else or what, you know what I mean? They just didn't quite get there for whatever reason. And like silly stuff was missed too, like the doctor who was helping them and was really sort of obsessed with this friendship, and not obsessed, but was really wanted to see them succeed and etc. Like just cinematically, they didn't age him though. Like once they like he was the
Yes.
same age the entire movie, even though these characters had aged 20 years in the future, his character never changed. And so it was like that was a really weird miss to not do anything with
Yeah.
that character or explain why he was so smitten with these boys. You know what I mean? It just didn't quite develop the way that it could have. And the character Milo, the fact that they changed his name in the very first scene of the movie made zero sense to me,
Yep.
other than they forgot what his name was or something. Because his name's Lucius or Lucian or something,
Yeah.
who is a character in the Morbius world in the comics. And it would have been cool if he was that character then, but then they just fully changed his name. He goes with it and then goes with the name Milo, and everyone calls him Milo from then on. Didn't make any sense to me.
Not a lick of sense. And how about in the beginning, the very beginning, it's like a prologue.
Yeah.
Morbius, Dr. Michael Morbius, he goes to a cave of vampire bats in South
Yes.
America. And you're like, ooh, what's this like Indiana Jones thing going on?
Right.
And then then it cuts to New York City and it says, or wherever it cuts to, and it says 25 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So now this whole movie, I'm expecting it to end where we began at the cave
Mm-hmm.
because that's what happens when you say 25 years earlier. Never showed up again. Didn't even go back to the cave. Like
Didn't make sense.
didn't make any sense.
Didn't make any sense. And everyone was like, he didn't tell people what he was doing with the bats or yeah, it didn't, not a lick of sense. And then suddenly the bats are in his office, and that didn't make any, like, how did all of these bats get into this enormous office that apparently is the size of a building and no one saw it happen? Like everyone was just blind to the fact that he had constructed an entire vault of bats.
And these bats live in like this glass case.
Didn't make any sense.
Bats can't survive that way. They live in
No.
caves for a reason. They're in like he's got them
Yes.
kept in like they can't even hang anywhere. They're just flying around
Constantly flying. They just never landed anywhere. They had no branches to land on. They had nothing at all. It didn't make any sense.
in like a fluorescent lighted room. It's just those bats are gonna die.
Yeah. 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 I don't know. It's like I said, it's such a promising character and storyline that they just fully missed the mark on in this one. There not enough good things to talk about, unfortunately.
No. One more bad thing I'll mention because it
Yeah.
I didn't catch it in like Morbius sits down at a coffee shop with Martine,
Mm.
his co-scientist and also apparently love interest, which it was almost like, oh, we need them to kiss so people think that they're in love.
Yeah.
So they kiss it like towards the end, and you're like, okay, sure.
Hmm.
But they're sitting at a diner, and Morbius, like Jared Leto, sticks his hand out over a cup of coffee, and then like acts like he got hurt. He's like, ooh. Then he's like, just joking. I'm not that kind of vampire. And I went, I don't get it.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Like, what does the coffee have to do with that? But then in hindsight, I was reading about the movie, and apparently he was sticking his hand out in a ray of light through the window and acting as if he got burned by the light.
Yep.
See, that's poor direction, because
if you don't understand that that's what he was doing.
Yeah. Where was the director to craft that moment visually? It's just one of many weird moments that don't land, jokes that don't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you're just baffled by it all.
Baffled. That's a great word for it. Baffled.
Baffled.
Baffled. Amazing. Amazing. So yeah, there we go. Morbius.
There
It's
it
a
is.
movie.
Anything else
movie.
to add? Any final thoughts? How would you rate this movie in one? How would you sum it up in one sentence?
Oh gosh. Morbius in one sentence. Interesting characters, potential plot line, horrible script, I think is my sentence. What about you?
Next time I'd like to see a rated R Morbius as a villain with Blade and Hell Cow.
Yes, please. That would be an epic movie for sure. For sure.
That's a great note to end it on, everybody. Thank you for hanging
Yes.
out and listening to us talk about Morbius. Not one of the better vampire movies, but we do love a good vampire movie here at Camp Kaiju and Gaze Do the D. So
It's true.
let's talk about more monster movies from the House of Mouse. We don't know what our next movie is going to be. We have ideas, maybe
right.
a holiday film. I don't know.
Lots of options out there. Let us know your thoughts. What do you want us to review? What are some Disney monster movies that intrigue you, that you want to figure out? How did this get made? And should it exist?
Yeah. And in the meantime, folks interested in Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Podcast, check out our links in the show notes and reach out, leave us a positive review and rating, and we would be eternally grateful.
Same over at Gaze to the D. Hit us up on Instagram, GDTD Podcast, or shoot us an email, info@gazetothed.com.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Patrick. This was a lot of fun. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. Don't know what you're up to.
My pleasure. Thank you, Vincent. Watch your neck. Don't get bit this Halloween season. Sweet.
Fun.
We did it. Morbius.
Yeah. It took me 3 nights to watch this movie.
I had to plow through it. I was like, I just got to get through this movie. It's not the worst, but it wasn't the best either.
It wasn't very engaging. I was just like, I wish there was.
It's annoying when things are poorly written like that. It's just like, come on, man, that was so lazy.
Yeah. I almost wish there was more vampire action. Like, I felt like we just spent a lot of time with Jared Leto being Jared Leto rather than. So, like, did I watch a vampire movie, or did I watch a movie about a scientist who sometimes turns into a vampire? I don't know. Yeah.
Which I think that's the problem with the movie. It just didn't pick a lane. Like, I'm interested in that conflict of the character who's just like, I really need to eat this person, but I can't. You know what I mean? And it was almost hokey that the way that they did that. I was like, this is actually a really interesting dilemma to have of like, I'm a good guy. My whole reason for existing is to save people's lives because of their blood illnesses. And now I have to eat people to stay alive. It's like, what a cool concept. And then they just didn't play with it, which is like, okay.
Yeah.
What?
Right. All right. Well,
Yeah.
before we spend more of our precious
I know.
weekend talking about this.
Bye.